we have said that we're going to be on a week-long crusade leading up to a possible court hearing on Friday to try to get justice for Wendy Traynor. So Wendy Traynor was murdered in cold blood by her estranged boyfriend in Milton in 2017. And this is a guy, if you're not familiar by now with the ins and outs of the case, we'll revisit it every day, but they had been dating. Joshua Ellis moved all the way across the country to Kentucky. Wendy Traynor ended up moving with him and then tried to come back on multiple occasions to Washington State to get away from him. And every time, he'd kind of suck her back in. She eventually got back and moved into this apartment in Milton. And he followed her there, and he ended up shooting and killing her in the apartment, left her for dead, would come up with some bogus self-defense claim, which was absolutely ridiculous, and a judge in his first trial said it was, and leaves her body there for a week for her dad and her uncle to find. I mean, just horrifying stuff. So we've been following this story because his first conviction was overturned due to a technicality. And rather than pursue a second trial, Pierce County prosecutors are floating him this sweetheart plea deal. It is so egregious. Under the terms of the plea deal, he could be out by 2025. Which is insane. And so Wendy's family has been speaking out. We've been speaking out on the show about, why are you doing this for the sake of convenience, expediency? It's not justice, and it's just indicative of a justice system gone awry. But there's another element to this case that we want to dig into today, and that is the fact that, as I said, you have politicians who are always talking about, gun control, gun violence. Yet you have countless examples of actual criminals who have actually committed violent crimes with a firearm. And then they're given sweetheart deals. Their firearms enhancements just disappear. And that seems to be the case for Joshua Ellis. So we got our hands on, thanks to the family, the deal that's being considered. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to compare it to his original conviction. In his original conviction, I just want to draw your attention to a couple things. So he ends up getting convicted of murder in the second degree. But he also was given a firearms enhancement of 60 months. So you've got the initial, the murder in the second degree, which is serious enough. But then they tack on an additional 60 months because he used a firearm in the commission of a felony. He used his 10 millimeter to shoot his ex-girlfriend in the back of the head. So they tack on this firearms enhancement, which is wholly appropriate. And as part of that sentencing, he was required to register as a felony firearm offender. And so that's going to follow him for the rest of his life. So now I want you to compare that to the offer and sentencing that is currently being floated. And again, this is still in the works, but this is the document that the family was given. So not only for the murder in the second degree are they offering to basically cut his original sentence in half, which is insane to me. It's truly insane to me. The standard range is 123 to 220 months, and they're recommending the low end of the standard range, 123 months for shooting your ex-girlfriend in the back of the head. And then you will also notice there's a little box if you're watching on the podcast, and you can check it if you're the prosecutor's office, stipulate to required registration as a felony firearm offender. So under this deal, he does not have to register as a felony firearm offender, and there is no mention of a firearms enhancement. So that 60 months that was tagged on, appropriately so, in the original sentence for committing a felony with a firearm disappears. Disappears. And then he doesn't have to register as a felony firearm offender. In a state where every single year, politicians in Olympia are coming up with new ways to regulate law-abiding gun owners. Every year. In a state where we hear whenever there's a violent crime, the immediate thing that politicians jump to is we've got to do something about gun violence. We've got to get guns out of the hands of criminals. Here you have a guy who, an abundance of evidence shows, stalked his estranged girlfriend across the country, shot her in the back of the head, left her to die for her family to find. And that is the person who we're just going to say, oh, well, you used a gun to commit a crime, but no big deal. When law-abiding gun owners who've never committed a crime with a gun in their lives are being restricted. You tell me how that makes sense. You tell me how that fits with the values, the prevailing values of the politicians in this state. And that's why whenever the issue of gun control comes up, I mean, I'm opposed to, I would say, the vast majority of gun control measures in our state for constitutional reasons. At the same time, I'm not a gun person. I don't own a gun. It's just not a particular thing of mine. But I value the right that the Second Amendment gives us. And I don't think that you should erode people's Second Amendment rights. If you want to change it, I've said before, get a constitutional amendment on the books. But what I would say is I would be more willing to entertain conversations about gun control if those same politicians were screaming from the rooftops to hold gun offenders accountable. If judges and prosecutors in this state were using the full weight of our criminal justice system against people who actually commit crimes with firearms, if that was 100% buttoned up, they were using every available power federally, from state law, federal law, to hold gun offenders accountable, and then they're like, hey, we still have an issue. A lot of people are getting shot in our country and in our state and in our cities. What else are we going to do? I would entertain that conversation, as long as it wasn't unconstitutional. But I think there are things you can do. But the problem is they're focused on that because it's politically exciting. It gets them the headlines. Bob Ferguson, oh, we banned semi-automatic assault weapons. Now I'm going to run for governor. But it's not as exciting to say, hey, here you got a guy, happens to be black, and that's probably why, they're saying, well, let's float him a deal. They're saying, well, it's not as sexy to talk about putting someone in prison for a long time because they had a gun who happens to be African American, because then we're talking about a criminal justice system that's disproportionate outcome, whatever it is. It's ridiculous. Either you care about guns being used to commit crimes, either you care about making sure that fewer people are killed with firearms, or you don't. And this, to me, is hypocrisy at its absolute worst. So all of that, besides the fact that Wendy Traynor deserves better than that. By the way, I should note, coming up on the show tomorrow, Ann Bremner is a Seattle-based attorney who has agreed to work for free with the family to raise awareness for this case. She's going to be joining us on the show. And then on Thursday, we're going to be joined by former Pierce County prosecutor Mark Lindquist, who was the county's elected prosecutor when Wendy Traynor was killed. He's going to join us to talk about their original charging decisions in this case and the case ultimately falling apart after the first conviction at trial. So we will, as we promised, we will beat the drum on this till the end of the week. We expect there to be a hearing on Friday. We're hoping that the Pierce County Prosecutor's Office changes course. I would encourage you to share this story. We have posts on all our social media pages. Share it with anyone who will listen.